Okay, so I know might come as a bit of a shock for some of you of, how many verses we're actually going to get through today. So we're actually going to get through not even 5 verses. All right, so I know, you guys are totally shocked how far we're getting today, especially when it comes to me. I know, it's a total surprise. All right, so we're in Genesis chapter 20. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a heads up warning. Exodus. Why do I keep saying Genesis? I need to change this at the top of my thing because I keep typing Genesis. All right, it's Exodus. All right, so we're in Exodus. So we're going to cover the first 4 verses fully and only part of verse 5 because there's an end of verse 5 and then verse 6, which there's no way we can cover all of that today. Okay, so we're going to save the generational stuff for next week. So with that being said, let's start with prayer. Heavenly Father, we praise you and thank you so much for your word and the clarity that it gives to our lives. And I just pray this morning that you, as we dive into the 10 Commandments, that you would just give us a fresh look and fresh perspective of really truly what these commandments are about and what they mean and how they actually do apply to us today in our lives, Lord. And we just ask these things in your name. Amen. Okay, so we're going to start with maybe some misconceptions of the 10 Commandments, like what the 10 Commandments are not, okay? Or there's some huge misconceptions. So you may have run across different people where they say, well, wait, there's not 10 commandments, there's 13 commandments. Okay? Well, they're not wrong. Okay? And it depends on how you break them up and how you word them and things like that. It's the rabbis and Hebrews, there's very, they would commonly say, well, there's 13. And they're not called commandments either in Scripture. God never calls them commandments. They're called words, the 10 words, okay? So later in Exodus and even in Deuteronomy, when they're referred to as the 10 words. Not commandments, but words, okay? Also, they are written to the Israelites, okay? So we see this all the time, like all over in our culture. People let's just scoop into this part of Exodus and take these verses, let's choose these commandments, and we're going to pull them out of complete context and just broad brush these commandments to everybody, for all people, for all time. But without really digging into what do these commandments or these words actually mean? What was their purpose? What did God intend for them? Also, interestingly enough, the reason that we know that they were designed specifically for the Israelite people is because the 10 Commandments, or the 10 words, are prefaced with a very clear statement from God to their specific audience. This is who God says these commandments are for. In verse 1, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. So the commands do contain language very specific to that culture. Like, for example, we have don't covet your neighbor's ox. All right? I mean, I guess if you have a farm, it's, don't covet your neighbor's cow, But even the Lord is saying, look, this is for you guys. This is for the Israelites, okay? So we're doing this, and we're going to see later why this is super important for us to keep these words, these commands in context, okay? And then we're going to flesh out later how they really do apply to us and their purpose for us as well. So, and it's interesting, though, that these words or commands, they're never communicated to Israel's neighbors. I mean, they're not given to Israel's neighbors and say, here's a group of 10 commandments that all the neighbors are supposed to live by too. Well, all the nations need to live by these other commandments as well, okay? And when the prophets pronounce judgment on Israel's neighbors, right, they're not measured against the 10 commandments. Instead, they're measured against a standard of basic human decency. Are they arrogant jerks? Have they taken advantage of other nations? Misfortune? Have they been unduly violent to people. See, none of those assessments arise from, well, you broke the 10 Commandments, so you're under judgment. Okay? Another huge misunderstanding regarding the 10 Commandments is, well, the Israelites had to earn their salvation by following these commands. Okay? But, you know, we have the grace of Jesus today, so we're good. We don't need to follow those commands for our salvation because we have Jesus, but they did. All right? But here's the thing. God did not send Moses into Egypt to tell the people, hey, you know what? I can get you all out of here. I just need you to sign on the dotted line and say you're going to keep all these commands, and I'll get you out of here. All right? No. These commandments were given after they were already rescued. Okay? These commands were to show them and to give them sort of a baseline on how to live in the freedom that they now had. Okay? So verse 2, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So the Israelites did not have a different means of salvation in the Old Testament. See, God had already brought them out of slavery. That was done. Okay? And this isn't different from the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob either. It was the same. God had a covenant relationship with them as well. And it started with Abraham. So keeping the covenant with God, it didn't earn him anything. Okay? He didn't earn anything extra by keeping the covenant. The Sinai covenant as well, it defined one's relationship with Yahweh. You were either in covenant with Yahweh, and there were expectations to be in the covenant. A lot of people think that the Abrahamic covenant was unconditional. Well, Abraham could just do whatever he wanted to do, and it was fine because God was just going to keep his end of the bargain. It was unconditional. No, it was conditional. Okay? So it's not like, well, Abraham didn't need to believe anything. It was just, you know, he could do whatever he wanted. God was going to work out his plan. Oh, but then after Sinai, suddenly things are conditional. Okay? It was always the same, right? So it wasn't, well, now after Sinai, you know, you just have blind obedience in every, you know, little speck of the law. And you know what? That merits your salvation now. God's in your debt because you kept all his commands, okay? No, it's not do that. So what it is if you live in this way, okay, you're keeping these commands that God has given them, it's showing all the rest of the nations, right, that they believe that Yahweh is the one that took them out of Egypt, the God of gods that is superior to all gods, the one true God. By living this out, they are proving to everybody that they believe that God is who he says he is, okay? It's about belief, okay? It's not about just behavior checking the boxes. It's about a belief system. See, you're not doing these things to earn your place at the table or to put God in your debt somehow. You do it because you believe that he is who he says he is, and you trust him with your eternal destiny, whatever that is. Okay? So this takes us into the whole works of the law controversy in the New Testament with Paul, right? And here's the thing. We talk a lot about the Pharisees and their laws, and they put laws on top of laws, right? And we see the same thing in churches today, right? You know, oh, don't cut your hair. Oh, you got to wear a little head thing covering. Oh, you can't wear pants. You can't wear bathing suits. And girls and boys can't swim together. I mean, all this crazy stuff, right? But the Pharisees of their day, right, they didn't believe either that by keeping all of these rules and laws that God was going to be in their debt. No, the reason they were so paranoid about following the laws, they didn't want to go back into exile again. They remembered what had happened before, and they didn't want that to happen again. So they knew that this exile that they went and them being captured, it resulted from disloyalty to their covenant relationship with God. So they were expelled from the land. Now in Jesus' day, they're back in the land, but they're just occupying it, but they're still under Roman occupation, okay? So they're still not free in a sense. So what Paul's really talking about with regards to the works of the law is you should no longer, the Israelites, they should no longer identify their relationship with God based on the commandments given at Sinai. Okay? But they were to base and define their relationship with God by virtue of Jesus, their Messiah. They're to identify him as the initiator of the new covenant that was promised in the Old Testament, and that believing in this Messiah, Jesus, was God in flesh, that he came as a man to fulfill the rest of the covenants and usher in a new covenant, and so now our faith is in him. So the salvation plan never changed. It's like, think of it this way, the Old Testament people were looking forward. We look back to the cross. The cross is in the center. They looked forward to the cross, we look back to the cross. Okay? So we recognize him, Jesus, as the incarnate God of Israel who sacrificed himself on our behalf. And so we live in the way that we do now, just like they were supposed to in the Old Testament. We live and we follow these commandments, and we live in this way to attract people to the faith. That's the whole point of the commandments, to live in such a way that attracts and draws other people to God. That's the point. And it's also to show the world where our loyalty lies. Our loyalty to this one now is to Jesus of Nazareth, the Messiah. In the Old Testament, before Jesus came on the scene, their loyalty was to Yahweh. They showed this, that they believed it, by keeping the commandments. So they didn't earn anything. So salvation's always been the same. All through the Old Testament, all through the New. Even now, it's about believing loyalty. Belief. So you believe, and then you illustrate that belief. So people are wondering, well, where's your faith at? What God do you serve? Well, you illustrate, you demonstrate who your God is through the way you live. That's exactly what they did. By keeping these commands, they were demonstrating to all the nations, we believe that Yahweh is our God. We are loyal to him because we are worshiping him, and we are following his commands. And the rest of the nations say, wow, I mean, you got a great society there. I mean, look, you guys are nice to each other. You respect each other. I mean, you have a great, how can we be part of this? It was to attract the nations to God. That was the point. And to show people who their loyalty was to. So, it was the same. It's the same today as it was with biblical Israel. You believe that Yahweh is the God of gods. He has entered into a covenant relationship with you, and you demonstrate that belief by not worshiping any other. And you want to be loyal to him out of gratitude because of what he's done for you. He brought you out of slavery. And so you want to obey his commands for the right reasons. Okay? So there's a lot of Christians, because of whatever their belief system or their position or whatever they've been taught, like I said, that believe that the Abrahamic covenant was unconditional, right? So he's under a different set of rules for salvation than the Israelites are, and then we're under a different set. No, the Abrahamic covenant was not unconditional. So if it's true that the Abrahamic covenant was different than the time before Moses, right? Then it would actually be different now because we're under a new covenant, right? But it's not different. The Abrahamic covenant had conditions, right? I mean, you remember Abraham, he had to be circumcised. right? And his family. I mean, he had to believe and be loyal to Yahweh, okay? So the loyalty was the means by which the belief was shown. So Abraham couldn't just say, oh, you want me to get circumcised, God? You know, that's a sign of the covenant. No, I don't think I want it. That's going to hurt. I don't want to do that. No, that's okay, God. No, he did it because he said, you know what? I believe you are who you say you are. I am loyal to you, and I'm going to do this out of my belief and loyalty to Yahweh alone, right? And so if Abraham doesn't do this, he's showing you don't even believe. So today, it's the same thing. You don't keep God's commandments. You're just showing the world you really don't even believe. You're just saying you do, but you don't. Okay? And Abraham is also not, his belief system isn't, okay, well, you know what? I obeyed you, God, so now it's time. I performed well. Now it's time for you to show up and do. Come on. You know, you're in my debt now because I did what you said. No, it's not that either. Okay? You have to believe. And if you believe, you will live a certain way, okay? So we already know from Exodus, remember when we did Exodus 19, the part about, you know, they lived a certain way to attract the nations back. They were to be a kingdom of priests, a holy nation, okay? That's why they were to live this way. So for us, we as Christians, we have got to stop thinking about our works as being some kind of necessary element to salvation. Our works don't earn our salvation or our standing before God. Faith is the necessary element for our salvations. Now, works are for a lot of reasons, but earning salvation is not one of them. Okay? And it's consistent across the board. Okay? So when we jump into these commandments, I want you to understand that these commands are not about earning a position before God. These commands are about defining a relationship that we do have with God because you believe that he is who he says he is. Okay? So the commands are about defining this relationship. It's not about earning a position. Okay? So, another common sort of misconception about the Ten Commandments is, and I've been in this camp, I have said these exact words. There's laws that pertain to God and there's laws that pertain to others. Okay? You just split them in half. Okay? And this is a very unfortunate misunderstanding that really goes back centuries and has been deeply entrenched. And the reason why this is an inadequate view of the Ten Commandments is it's an inadequate understanding of how covenants work. This is a covenant that God is making with Israel. And here's the thing, in a covenant community, you don't have, well, these laws just pertain to God and these laws just pertain to other people and then that's it. No, all of life in a covenant relationship, in a covenant community, all of life is an expression of worship and loyalty to God. All of these commands. So it's not, they're not separate commands, some for God and some for others. They are all for God. They are all for God. So the Ten Commandments, as I said, they pertain to our loyalty to God, including how we interact with each other in community. So also, you know, we've seen the Ten Commandments, right? We got Moses coming down from the mountain and he's holding two tablets and there's 5 on one and 5 on the other and he's carrying them down the mountain, right? These heavy tablets of stone. Volume 1 and Volume 2 is kind of what, you know, what the artistic representation is. However, from biblical text, we know that the commands were written on both sides of the tablets. Okay? Exodus 32:15. And Moses turned and he went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in his hand, tablets inscribed on both sides, on front and back. Now, these words could easily fit on two sides of a single stone, even if the tablet was not much larger than Moses' hand. It could fit on front and back, okay? So then that brings up another question. Why make two? Why two? Well, in ancient times, in your ancient treaty documents, it was standard practice to make duplicate copies. So these commands in this covenant was written like a near ancient treaty document, okay? And they were etched in stone, and one copy belonged to each party. So each copy would customarily be placed in the community's most important temples so that their respective little g gods could see the terms of the treaty and watch to ensure that they remain faithful to the treaty, okay? Well, in the case of Yahweh's covenant with Israel, there was only one temple because there's only one true God to worship, okay? There's only one temple or tabernacle. So there's no one greater than Yahweh, right? And so he's the only deity that could ensure Yahweh's faithfulness to the covenant. There was no higher power that could hold God accountable, right? He's it. He's the end of the line. He's the boss of the bosses. So they put it into the temple. So the two copies, okay? So, and also, this brings us back to another point. So remember when Pharaoh mockingly asked, who's this Yahweh, right? Yep, now he knows who he is, right? But also, even more importantly, so does all of Israel. They know exactly who he is. So when God says, so we need to keep these verses in context together. When God says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery, they're like, yep, you sure did. So we know that that means you're the God of all gods. Verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me, little g gods. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. That's all we're going to cover from verse 5 today, because all the generational stuff is going to be in next week. So, the keeping of the commandment demonstrates something that is believed, okay? So this is the loyalty element. Don't have other gods before me. Don't believe, you need to believe that Yahweh is your God and you reserve all of your loyalty for him. So the plague should have taught Israel that Yahweh was above all creation, not a part of creation, but over all of creation, in charge of it. So don't make an image of anything or any likeness that's either in heaven above, earth beneath, or water under the earth. Because the Lord your God, he's not part of creation. He is separate from creation. He's the one who created. He is the creator, not a created thing. He's completely other, and nothing in creation is like him or he is equal, and he is unrepresentable by anything in creation. So you might think, well, God came as a man, right? So can't we make a statue of a man, an idol of a man? No, because you're not supposed to bow down and worship any created thing made with your own hands. Now, it talks about images from heaven above and things like that. So remember, they did the cherubim, right? So they for the temple and things like that, okay? So they were to fashion them by God's command, but they weren't to worship them. They were not to worship the ark, okay? The ark isn't supposed to become some supernatural, superstitious token, right? The command is that you don't worship anything made with human hands, because our God is not made. Our God is uncreated. So you talk about a man, well, I have a picture of Jesus on my wall. Do I need to take that picture down because, I have an image, right, of Jesus? Should I take it down and destroy it? No, you don't have to. But are you worshiping that? Well, then, yeah, throw it away if you're worshiping it, right? If you're bowing down to it and worshiping, then yeah, you need to get rid of it, okay? This whole statement is to get them to understand, I will only bow and worship the uncreated God, the uncreated creator. That's the line in the sand. Then we hear about God, it talks about God. God is a jealous God. So this term jealousy, there is no word in our human language that can really actually define this word jealousy. It's sort of, the closest that it can come to in our language is similar to a metaphor for a violation of marriage, okay? You break the covenant, you are unfaithful, okay? It's very similar, but it's about God's attitude. He is zealous. He is passionate about his people. He is zealous for his people. Like, it's this intense emotional reaction and response, okay, is what it is. It's about a violation. We can understand this. Best context is a violation of intimacy in a marriage relationship. When we are disloyal to God, that is God's response. His emotional, this intense, passionate response. And there's a lot of scripture passages in the Old Testament about God's response to the disloyalty of Israel when they go off and worship the other gods. God demands exclusive loyalty from Israel, and according to this interpretation, his reaction to infidelity is expressed in human jealousy. But the word kana in Hebrew, which is solely used in the Bible only of God. It is never used of a human being ever. Now, so in verse, I do have time to tip in this. So I'm going to tip in this just a little bit in verse 5 and 6 about the generational thing. But we're going to finish it. I'm going to cut myself off so we can watch our law video, and then we'll finish it next week. So we'll see how far we get. So 5 and 6. So he's a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. So again, we can't pull these verses out of context, right, and make them into something they are not. So notice in verse 6, God shows steadfast love to thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. If you were an Israelite and your parents lived contrary to the commandments of God, worshipped idols, going and making sacrifice to whatever deity and God that they wanted, but then you had these parents and then you chose, hey, I'm going to follow the Lord my God with all my heart. Well, guess what? God doesn't care about what your parents do. He's going to honor you and your faithfulness and loyalty to him. Okay? So your relationship to God depends on your believing loyalty to him. It's not affected in any way, shape, or form by some mythical generational curse idea or some generational crazy curse that somebody utters over you or somebody else in your family, okay? God is more powerful than some human words, okay? That's not more powerful than the gospel. You know, there's no, well, oh, gosh, I found out my great-grandmother was a witch, or my grandfather did some evil things or whatever, so I'm under some curse. I got to buy some book and access these special prayers and sit and have somebody pray for hours over me to break this curse. It's just lies. It's Christian voodoo. It's just lies. So we got to stop giving place to these lies and believe the truth. Is God who he says he is? Where's your believing loyalty? Well, if it's him, then that's all you need. Is he the Lord your God that brought you out of the house of bondage? Is he the creator? Now, there's a huge difference between consequences and your eternal standing with God. Okay? Now, in families, there are some societal consequences that may result. So, for example, one of your grandparents is a serial killer, okay? All right. But then I have the gift of prophecy. I'm kidding. I'm trying to take Jeff's job away from him. I know, right? Same thing, right? All right. So, but here's the thing. So, there's going to be shame for your family and society, right? However, that has zero bearing on your relationship with God. Absolutely none. It has zero bearing on how God sees you being in a relationship with Him. Zero bearing on it. However, there are societal consequences, right? So you have to decide, is Jesus, who's Yahweh in the flesh, the God who brought Israel out of Egypt, and His work on the cross, is it sufficient or not? That's the fundamental question. Either you believe it or you don't. See, you can't say that you believe that, and then you're running around freaking out and cringing in some corner, freaking out about some generational curse. Because your actions show, well, you don't really believe that the gospel is sufficient, right? So what you need to do is start trusting God, stop believing the lies, start believing truth of what God says about you, and then live your life by being a disciple of Christ. Be a partner in the Great Commission and start doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And God will honor that and bless that. Okay? So, we're going to watch a little video about the laws and how it pertains to us and how we should live and the point of the laws in our relationship with Christ. Because just like the Israelites were to live these out to show their loyalty to God, to attract people to Christ, this is why we live out God's laws. To attract people to Him, to prove to other people around us where our loyalty lies, okay? So we're going to watch this quick video, and I'm actually on time. I'm happy. All right.
You're most likely familiar with the 10 Commandments in the Bible, stuff we generally take as good advice. Don't murder, don't steal, honor your parents, the list goes on.
And those are just the first 10. There are actually a total of 613 commands, all given to ancient Israel, found in the first 5 books of the Bible, which in Hebrew are called the Torah.
Now, the word Torah is usually translated in English as the law, because it has all of these laws in it. And as you read through them, you wonder, am I supposed to obey some of these, all of these? I mean, what's the purpose of the law?
Well, that translation is kind of confusing because while the Torah has laws in it, the book itself is fundamentally a story about how God is creating new kinds of people who are fully able to love God and love others. And when Jesus taught about the Torah, He said that He was bringing that story to its fulfillment.
So walk me through the story and how it's fulfilled.
So the story begins with God creating humanity who rebels. And God chooses Abraham to bless all of the nations through his family, who end up in slavery down in Egypt, and so God rescues them. Then at Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with Israel, like an agreement. And all of the laws that Moses gives to Israel are the terms of that agreement. They're like a constitution. And so some of the laws, they're about rituals and customs that set Israel apart from the nations. Other laws are about social justice or morality. And by following these, Israel would show the other nations what God is like.
Okay, so the rest of the Torah is just the complete list of laws that Moses gives Israel?
No, the rest of the Torah just continues the story. And the 613 commands are only a selection from that original constitution. And even these have been broken up and placed at strategic points within the story. Now pay attention, because you'll see a really clear pattern. Moses gives the first laws to Israel.
Yeah, don't worship other gods, don't make idols.
And then right after that, there's a story of Israel breaking those very laws.
Yeah, they worship the golden calf.
And so Moses gives some more laws, and then you get more stories of rebellion. Some more laws, rebellion again, some more laws, more rebellion, and you start to see the point.
Right, no matter how many laws, they're just going to continue to rebel.
So at the conclusion of the Torah's story, Moses gives this final speech to Israel as they prepare to go into their new home. And he tells them, you guys, I know that you're not going to follow all of God's laws. You've proven to me that you're incapable. And Moses says the problem is that their hearts are hard and that they're going to need new, transformed hearts if they're ever going to truly follow God's law. And he was right. I mean, the story goes on to recount Israel's total failure.
They go into the land, they break all the laws.
Right. Now, the next section of books in the Jewish tradition are the 15 books of the prophets, and they reflect back on the story. For example, Ezekiel, he said that if Israel was ever going to obey the law, God's Spirit would have to transform their hard hearts into soft hearts. And Jeremiah said that's when obedience to God's commands wouldn't feel like a duty, but they would be written deep in their hearts. And Isaiah, he promised a future leader, Israel's Messiah, who will lead all of the people in obedience to the law. Now, in Jewish tradition, all of these books together are called the prophets, even the historical books, because they're continuing the story told from the perspective of the prophets.
Okay, so we have the law and the prophets, and they're telling one connected story about God's desire to bless the whole world through a people, Israel, who it turns out needs a new heart.
Yes, and Jesus saw himself as continuing that story. So he agreed with the law and the prophets when he taught that it's out of the human heart that come the most ugly parts of human nature. It's like the default setting of our hearts is opposed to God's law. But Jesus also said that he came to solve that problem, and in his words, to fulfill the law.
So what does he mean there, to fulfill the law?
Well, first he said that the demand of all of the laws in the Torah could be fulfilled by what he called the Great Command, that we are to love God and to love others.
So that seems pretty easy. I mean, we all want to love.
Well, we think we want to love. But Jesus showed how love is far more demanding than we realize. So he quotes the law, do not murder. And he says, yes, not killing someone is a very loving thing to do. But then he also says that when you treat someone with disrespect or when you nurse resentment against them, you're also violating God's moral ideal because you're not treating that person with love. And so Jesus said true love ought to extend even to our own enemies. So even though this command seems very simple, Jesus showed how our hearts are not currently equipped to fulfill even this basic command of God to love others.
And that's kind of a downer.
But where Israel failed, Jesus brought this story to its fulfillment. As Israel's Messiah, he fully loved God and others, and he showed all of the nations what God is truly like. He did this through his acts of compassion and mercy, and ultimately by loving his enemies even unto death. And after his resurrection, he told his followers that he would send God's Spirit to transform their hearts so that they could follow him and fulfill the purpose of the law, to love God and to love their neighbor. So this fulfills the story of the law and the prophets, or in the words of the Apostle Paul, the one who loves fulfills the law.
So as you can see, the Ten Commandments are about a lot more than what we kind of make them out to be today. So we're going to end it there. If anybody has any comments or things I want to add in, I think we have a couple minutes. Larry, yeah, let me get your microphone. We got the live stream, I know. We can hear you in there, but they can't hear you out in live stream land.
I was just thinking about when you taught us, and you taught us well, about how there was a condition to the covenant. Mm-hmm. And there was. I used to believe that God made the covenant with himself because it says he swore unto himself. And I do understand that, I think. But in Genesis 15:6, it says that, and he, which is Abraham, believed the Lord, and he, the Lord, counted it unto him for righteousness.
Right.
So it's like you said, it is about believing God and faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's the fulfillment of the covenant, is believing what God says and living it out in your life.
Yes. And the fact that he did the circumcision and took Isaac up to sacrifice shows that he believed that God who he didn't do that just to check the boxes.
Right, and the circumcision was a token between man and God, and that's pretty clear. And it was a token of just being a covenant people. It didn't save them, but it was a covenant
Right,
people.
right.
Now, as covenant believers, we're circumcised in our heart, and we're covenant people by the changed heart.
Yes, yes. That was good, Larry. Thanks for adding that in. Somebody else? All right. We'll end in prayer. I'm actually on time today. Dear Heavenly Father, we do praise you and thank you for your word and the commands that you give us, Lord. And I just thank you for bringing clarity and accurate perspective to the commands in the law and how they pertain to us, Lord. And I just pray that we would really just get it right in our thinking, Lord, that keeping these commands, it's not about going down a checklist of doing things to earn brownie points or to gain anything from you, but that we do it because we desire and love to love you and love others because we believe that you are who you say you are, and we desire to please and honor and glorify you through the way that we live. And we know that by doing that we do attract those around us to you, and that we more accurately represent and reflect you and your character to those around us who do not know you. And so, Lord, I just pray this week that you would just help us to live out, not keeping a checklist of laws, but that we would live out loving you and loving others in such a way that it would attract people to you and draw people into a desire of a relationship with you, Lord. And I pray for the rest of our morning. I pray for our worship time that we would magnify and glorify you in spirit and in truth. And I pray for Brother Simpson as he brings the word this morning, that we would honor you by listening to your word, that we would open our hearts and our minds to your spirit, that we would not just walk out of here saying, yay, that was a great message or service, but that we would walk out of here with a transformed thinking and a transformed heart. And we ask these things in your name. Amen.